Obsessed with Assessment podcast coming at you. The show on which there is no assessment related topic we will back away from. My name is Sam Deno. I've got a secondary school background, having taught as an English teacher before moving into EdTech and creating the Beyond Secondary Resources suite of products for Twinkle. And this is Emma McHale.
And I come from a primary background, teaching for 12 years and now working alongside Sam at Twinkle.
We're going to be talking about grading systems.
You came in hard with coming in strong and then said something that sounded not exciting. So this better be good now.
It's an area of assessment that is much more contentious than you might imagine. All the dirt coming up next. We're going to be taking a look at some grading systems that are used around the world in this episode to better understand how English exams work. Sound dry, Emma?
No comment. I'm happy to be surprised.
Great. I think you're going to love this. I think you're going to love it. We'll start with something really obvious and we'll build from there. It gets more exciting. It gets more exciting as it goes along. It's like
I can't wait. It'll be a roller coaster. A roller coaster of assessment.
Yes, exactly. So absolute grading, or to use its posh name, criterion referenced testing, describes grading in which the grade criteria is shared before the test. Whatever a student scores against that criteria determines what their end result is. For example, a student might need to accrue 70 marks to receive a grade B and 80 marks to receive a grade A. And if they get 70, they get the grade B. And if they get 80, then they get the grade A. That's quite straightforward, isn't it?
Yep, that is straightforward. I know what the other option is.
But you might not know what the other options are. There's more than one more option here. So some Nordic countries, such as Finland, use absolute grading. And I suppose that this was the starting point, is clearly the starting point for where assessment would have begun. But then people began exploring its merits. So during the early 20th century, you got a couple of Americans called Daniel Starch and Edward C. Elliott of the University of Wisconsin. They experimented by sending the same students' test answers to teachers around the country, around America. And they asked them to mark each one and report back their marks.
Like a massive scale moderation, I assume.
Exactly, yep. And do you know what they found?
They weren't consistent?
Yeah. Wide variation. It says here sometimes by as much as 35 or 40 marks.
Oh, that is quite big.
That sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Even we haven't got the scales, but that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, in the US, relative grading was introduced. So here we go. So we're stepping it up here. Relative grading, which is also known as norm-referenced testing, to use its posh name, or sometimes marking on a curve, describes grading in which grade criteria is determined by results relative to a cohort of students. So, for example, the top 20% of scores in a cohort could be awarded a grade A, whereas the bottom 20% could be given a grade F. So it doesn't matter what mark you get, if you are in that top 20% in the class, you will get the grade A.
I am doing a face. I have opinions on this.
Would you like to introduce your opinions?
Oh, I understand the merit of a relative grading system. I do. You know, if a university, for example, wants only the top 20% of students in terms of what they get for their, A levels, let's say in the UK, then saying, well, we only want people with A stars for this makes sense. I think the idea that some children are that there's no chance that everybody in the class can pass is just awful. you're sort of saying it doesn't matter how hard everybody works, there's always going to be 20% who essentially fail. I actually have less of an issue with relative grading if the grading is just a score that you get at the end. And then maybe that is used to inform what university or something you go to. I have a real issue with it when it informs a pass or fail, essentially. So when you're looking at GCSEs, I mean, I know it's not A to C. I know it's not A to C now, but back in my day when we were at school, a C was what you needed to get. That's what people ask for jobs. English and maths A to C. And if less than a C is a fail, and there's always going to be relative grading, then there's always going to be people who can never get a C ever.
It's quota controlled grades, isn't it?
Massively.
So, okay, sorry, we've run out of A's now because you're not in that top 20%.
Yeah.
Maud Klepzig.
That's a great name, by the way.
Really good name. Another American, in her 1930 study at the Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical College, concluded that there was less variation in grading when marking on a relative grading curve as opposed to the absolute grading. So they found that. So this is after this was introduced, this relative grading system. She and many other academics concluded that this system offered benefits that had been previously missing, although she did caveat her findings with the admission that, and this is what she said, educators who are pioneers in testing are divided in their opinion on this problem. So she still describes it as a problem, and she still says people are fighting over it. It's contentious. So that's two systems. Now, actually, prior to doing this research, I thought that covered everything. But no. In fact, the UK system does not use either absolute nor relative. It uses something somewhere in between those two poles. And you could call it attainment referenced testing. Ofsted also call it scaled scoring.
Yeah, that's a term I'm more familiar with, yeah.
It draws from both absolute and relative. The marking criteria is absolute, and whatever level a student achieves, they will be awarded the raw marks accordingly. Crucially, though, these are raw marks and merely serve as an indicator against the true scaled score, which is determined at a national level once all of the results are in.
Once your bell curves in.
And so this way, if the test is seen as having been easy, in inverted commas, overall, then the scaled score may be lowered against the raw marks, and if it's seen as having been hard, in inverted commas, then the scaled score will be raised. And we see this in Key Stage 2 SATs, GCSEs, A-levels, they're all handled in that way. What do you think of that?
I mean, I say I have quite strong opinions. I think it's exclusionary, in my opinion.
How is that exclusionary?
Just think you're going to have children who always know that they're never going to pass something, or you never have enough, whatever, they get the raw score or whatever, and we can say, you were aiming for this, so that's great for you, but which is what a lot of teachers do, but they're just never gonna, I don't know, they're never gonna meet a grade, and that makes me sad.
It doesn't feel as honest.
No, absolutely.
If I take a class through their mocks and say, so you got 70%, you've got an A, and they said, okay, well, if I do the same again in my exams, will I get an A? But you can't. There's no answer to that.
Yeah.
So you can tell them what they'll get against the specifications and the criteria, but you can't tell them what their grade will be at the end. And that it does feel as though sort of goalposts can be shifted against what you previously understood to be true.
I guess my nearest sort of reference for that is the phonics screening test for year one. Everybody thinks they know what the pass mark every year, but it moves because it's relative. And if you've got a bunch of children who think that I've got to get 32 to pass, I've got to get 33, I've got to get 34, whatever they've been told it is to pass, and then suddenly they decide that those words were too easy, and those children don't pass despite the fact that they've worked really hard. And it's sad. That's one of the earliest assessments they do as well. Some schools are Some schools have a really different approach to how open they are with assessment as well. I think my experience in schools is that we treated it with a little bit more like, just do your best and don't worry about it. And I think we kept the pressure quite low. But some schools do have those discussions with children, like, you need this to pass this, and if
really,
you're 6 years old,
yeah,
and then you might get told something different when the scores come out. It's just not a pleasant way of entering, quite a lot of years of assessment that you've got ahead of you.
So this discourse over grading then, as we can see, continues to this day, particularly in America, where they still predominantly do use relative grading. And Schneider and Hutt, in their 2019 essay, they say this: grades began as an intimate communication tool among teachers, parents and students, used largely to inform and instruct. So far, so good.
The things we like about assessment, use it to inform your next steps, all that stuff.
But as reformers worked to develop a national school system in the late 19th century, they saw grades as useful tools in an organisational rather than pedagogical enterprise. Tools that would facilitate movement, communication and coordination. Reformers placed a premium on readily interpretable and necessarily abstract grading systems. Which is just really sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it goes back to the whole thing around, so obviously absolute grading is far more effective when it comes to supporting a child's learning and development, because you can tell them what they did and what they've got and how they can improve.
And they know what they're aiming for, don't they, as well?
Yeah. Whereas this relative grading, these gradings on curves, that is all about kind of the accountability side of things and supporting schools to improve, schools to become better, schools to outrank each other, which in some ways, of course, is good for the child, but it's much more about sort of systemic, broader goals as opposed to just the education of that child. Does an understanding of the mechanics behind our grading system offer us any benefit as classroom teachers? That's what I've been grappling with. We can take this in two directions. Technically, there are ideas here that we can use to mix up our classroom-based assessments, and conceptually, there are some ethical considerations that I think are worth being conscious of. So first of all, technically, why not try this? You could experiment with different grading approaches. So you could actually try using relative grading in some of your low stakes classroom tests and see how they land. In the UK, our pupils might actually find it a bit fun, like a fresh incentive to attempt to rank themselves against classmates. And obviously different classes are likely to react differently, and it won't work for everyone, but it offers a chance to mess around with your pedagogy if that's something that you fancy tackling.
I can imagine children in my class that if they were told the outcome of this test is based on like how you all perform in comparison to each other, that it would have just destroyed them.
Yeah. So like I say, I think it is about the class. You got to know your class. But in some ways, if you know, and it's got to be low stakes testing. I think you don't want to do
Definitely
that with any high stakes stuff. But it's an interesting thing to play with potentially. Another idea: absolute grading offers the best formative opportunities, as we've said. So make sure you're taking advantage of that and maximising the chance to feedback to your pupils following a test run using that method of absolute grading. And then one sort of final point that I was going to pick out was that all testing and feedback is subject to bias, both visible and invisible. So just an encouragement to teachers: think carefully when assessing and marking, and seek to recognise any inherent biases that you might carry in order to mitigate against them when you're doing your testing. I think that's everything I've got. Do you think that was... I shouldn't say, do you think that was really exciting?
You did start with this. You know, you the energy was high at the beginning of this. It is interesting. You're assessing children in that low stakes way. They always know what the pass mark is, or you know, what's considered to be good, what they're aiming for, and then when they do something that actually is high stakes and will probably mean something for them later in life, we suddenly go like, maybe that's an A. Who knows? And
yeah,
I stand by my point that I think relative grading is really exclusionary.
I guess it's different from state to state in America, but interesting that predominantly that is what they run with in the States. Great. Well, let's park it there. Don't forget that you can contact us on assessment@twinkle.co.uk. Leave a comment, like, subscribe. Have the best time. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.